The stars had been quiet for 30 years. Humanity spread across 12 different solar systems, building colonies and making friends with alien races they met along the way. Earth's government, called the Terran Assembly, worked hard to keep peace between all the different species. Everything seemed safe. Commander Dae-hyun sat in his office on Mars Defense Station reviewing patrol reports. He was a tall man with tired eyes and gray hair at his temples. For 20 years he had served in the Terran Defense Fleet, but most of that time was spent on training exercises and border patrols. Real threats were rare. Maybe that made everyone too comfortable. His computer screen flickered. An urgent message appeared. Long-range sensors had detected something massive coming out of deep space. Dae-hyun leaned forward, his heart beating faster. The sensor readings showed hundreds of ships all moving in perfect formation toward human territory. He opened a communication channel to Captain Ji-won, who commanded the flagship TDS Indomitable. She appeared on his screen, her face serious. "You're seeing this too?" she asked. "Yes. Send a standard greeting message," Dae-hyun ordered. Maybe they're just passing through, but deep in his gut he knew something was wrong. The fleet was too organized, too purposeful. These ships were not explorers. 2 hours later, the alien fleet reached the edge of human space near Harmony Station. The station was home to 40,000 people, including families, scientists, and traders from different species. It was a symbol of peace, a place where humans and aliens lived together. Dr. Hana worked in the station's diplomatic wing. She was a language expert who had spent her life learning how aliens think and speak. When the alien fleet arrived, she was the first to receive their message. She listened to the strange sounds, her hands shaking as she translated the words. The message was simple and terrifying. Surrender all human colonies in 30 cycles. Resistance means death. We are the Velcrin Dominion. You will obey. Hana immediately sent the translation to the Terran Assembly on Earth. She added her analysis. The Velcrin language was harsh, commanding. They spoke like masters talking to slaves. There was no room for discussion in their words. Minister Kyung-soo received the message in the assembly hall. He was an older man who had lived through the last major human conflict 50 years ago. He knew what war looked like, and he did not want to see it again. He called for an emergency meeting. "We must try to negotiate," he said to the other ministers. "Maybe they don't understand that we are a peaceful civilization. We should explain." The assembly voted to send a diplomatic response. They offered to meet with Velcrin leaders to discuss terms to find a peaceful solution. Hana prepared the message carefully, using respectful language that most alien species understood. The Velcrin response came within hours. Harmony Station exploded without warning. One moment it was there, lit up against the darkness of space. The next moment it was debris and fire. 40,000 lives ended in seconds. No evacuation. No final messages. Just silence. Dae-hyun watched the station's destruction on his screens. He felt cold inside, a familiar numbness from his military training taking over, but his hands gripped the edge of his desk until his knuckles turned white. Captain Ji-won called him immediately, her face pale with shock. "They didn't even wait for our response," she whispered. "They just killed everyone." The Terran Assembly erupted in chaos. Some ministers demanded immediate military action. Others wanted to evacuate all outer colonies before more people died. Minister Kyung-soo stood in the center of the arguing crowd, trying to maintain order. Dae-hyun was summoned to Earth to address the assembly. He stood before them in his uniform, feeling the weight of what was coming. "We need to understand our enemy before we fight them," he said. His voice was calm but firm. "They have superior weapons. They destroyed Harmony Station with one shot. If we attack them directly now, we will lose." "So we do nothing?" shouted one minister. "We let them kill our people?" "No," Dae-hyun replied. "We study them. We learn how they fight, how they think. Then we strike where they are weak, not where they are strong." Some ministers agreed. Others called him a coward. But Minister Kyung-soo made the final decision. "Give Commander Dae-hyun 1 week," he said. "If he cannot find a strategy, we mobilize the full fleet for direct combat." The Velcrin continued their advance. 3 outer colonies went silent. The Terran fleet sent 2 battle groups to investigate and defend. Both groups were destroyed. The Velcrin ships had shields that human weapons could not penetrate. They moved faster than human vessels and hit harder. In every direct fight, humanity lost. Fear spread through human space. Millions of people tried to flee from outer colonies back toward Earth. The refugee ships clogged the space lanes, making organization difficult. Some colonies refused to evacuate, believing they could defend themselves. Most of those colonies were destroyed within days. Dae-hyun gathered his best officers and scientists. Captain Ji-won joined him, along with Lieutenant Bora, a young tactical officer with a brilliant mind for patterns. Dr. Hana came from Earth, carrying all her research on alien psychology. Engineer Tae Yang arrived from the shipyards, bringing technical analysis of the destroyed ships. They locked themselves in a secure facility on Mars. Outside, humanity panicked. Inside, this small group worked to find an answer. They watched recordings of the battles over and over. They studied the debris from destroyed human ships. They analyzed every word the Velkrin had spoken. They're efficient killers, Captain Ji-won observed, but they're also predictable. Look at how their ships move. The same formations in every battle. They think they've already won, Hana added. Their language has no words for retreat or negotiation. Only conquest and surrender. Dae-hyun stared at the star maps on the wall. The Velkrin were advancing toward Earth in a straight line, destroying everything in their path. Efficient, logical, but also rigid and unchanging. An idea began to form in his mind. It was dangerous and would require sacrifices, but it might be humanity's only chance. They think we're primitives, he said slowly. They think they know everything about how we fight because they've destroyed a few of our ships. What if we let them keep thinking that? What if we show them exactly what they expect to see? The others looked at him with confusion at first. Then understanding dawned on their faces. You want to feed them false information, Bora said. Make them overconfident. More than that, Dae-hyun replied. I want to lead them into a trap. But first we need to make them believe the trap is actually our last desperate stand. Minister Kyung-soo gave them 3 weeks instead of 1. The Terran Assembly authorized Dae-hyun to implement whatever strategy he thought best. They also gave him emergency powers to override local commanders and requisition any resources he needed. It was a huge responsibility. If Dae-hyun failed, humanity might not survive. The Velkrin were getting closer to Earth with every passing day, and they showed no signs of slowing down. But Dae-hyun felt something he had not felt in years: hope. Not because victory was certain, but because humanity finally had a plan. And that plan would use the Velkrin's greatest strength against them, their absolute confidence that they could not lose. Commander Dae-hyun's strategy required information. Lots of it. He needed to know everything about the Velkrin, how they organized their military, what they valued, what they feared, and most importantly, where they were vulnerable. Traditional warfare was not working, so humanity needed to try something different. Captain Ji-won volunteered her ship for a dangerous mission. The TDS Indomitable would raid a Velkrin supply depot located at the edge of human space. The goal was not to destroy the depot, but to steal data and capture equipment. It was risky. If the Velkrin captured Ji-won and her crew, they would learn that humanity was planning something unexpected. The night before the mission, Ji-won walked through her ship, checking on her crew. They were scared but ready. One young ensign asked her if they would survive. Ji-won put a hand on his shoulder and said, "We survive by being smarter than them. Remember that." The Indomitable approached the supply depot while using an asteroid field for cover. The Velkrin had sensors, but their technology focused on raw power rather than detecting stealth approaches. Human ships were smaller and could hide more easily. This was one small advantage humanity had. Ji-won's crew watched the depot carefully. Velkrin ships came and went, loading supplies and fuel. Guards patrolled in predictable patterns. After 6 hours of observation, Lieutenant Bora identified a 12-minute window when the depot's sensors rotated to scan a different direction. 12 minutes to get in. Grab what we need and get out, Bora said over the communication channel. It's tight. Then we better be fast, Ji-won replied. The Indomitable's assault team launched in small boarding pods. They flew silently through space, magnetic clamps ready. When they reached the depot, they attached to its outer hull and cut through. Alarms would sound eventually, but hopefully not before they found what they needed. Inside the depot, the team moved quickly. Velkrin technology was everywhere. The aliens stored data in crystalline structures that glowed with an orange light. Engineer Tae Yang, who had joined the assault team despite the danger, started downloading everything he could access. Meanwhile, soldiers grabbed weapons, armor pieces, and anything that looked important. They had been inside for 8 minutes when a Velcrin guard appeared. The alien was massive, nearly 3 meters tall, with 4 arms and armored skin. It roared and reached for a weapon. The human soldiers fired first. Their weapons barely scratched the Velcrin's armor, but the impact was enough to knock it backward through a doorway. "Time to leave," G1 shouted. The team ran back to their boarding pods. Behind them, more alarms sounded. The depot's defense systems activated. Automated guns began firing. 2 members of the assault team were hit. Their comrades grabbed them and kept moving. There was no time to stop. The boarding pods detached and flew back to the Indomitable. Velcrin fighters launched from the depot, chasing them. G1's ship fired its engines and dove back into the asteroid field. The Velcrin fighters followed but were less skilled at navigating through the spinning rocks. 3 fighters crashed. The others gave up the chase. The Indomitable escaped, but 5 crew members had died in the raid. G1 held a memorial service for them that same day. She stood before the crew and said, "They gave their lives so we could learn. We honor them by using what they helped us obtain." Back on Mars, Daehyun and his team examined everything the raid had captured. Tae-yang worked day and night to decode the Velcrin data crystals. Dr. Hana studied the language files, looking for patterns in how the Velcrin communicated. Bora analyzed battle recordings that showed Velcrin tactical formations. After 3 days, they started to understand their enemy. The Velcrin were an old species. They had conquered 17 other civilizations over the past 3 centuries. Each time they used the same basic strategy: overwhelming force followed by complete subjugation. Conquered species became servants or were eliminated if they resisted too much. The Velcrin saw themselves as the rightful rulers of the galaxy. Their military operated on strict rules. Every ship had a specific role. Every commander followed a doctrine written centuries ago. When they encountered a new enemy, they studied that enemy's tactics for a short time, then applied their standard conquest strategy. It had always worked before. "They're not stupid," Hana explained to the group, "but they're inflexible. They have one way of doing things, and they never change it because they've never needed to." Tae-yang made an even more important discovery. The Velcrin shields, which had made them seem invincible, worked by generating a harmonic frequency that dispersed energy weapons. However, the shields had a weakness. If they were hit with a weapon tuned to a very specific counter-frequency, the shields would fail for several seconds. "The problem is finding that exact frequency," Tae-yang said. "It's different for each ship class, and if we're even slightly wrong, the shields stay up and they know we're trying something new." Daehyun nodded slowly. "So we need to test this in secret. We need to capture a Velcrin ship intact and experiment on it." That seemed impossible. The Velcrin never left their ships behind. When a Velcrin vessel was damaged too badly to fight, it self-destructed. But Bora suggested something clever. What if humanity could fake destroying a Velcrin ship while actually just disabling it? If the Velcrin thought the ship was destroyed, they would not send help. Daehyun approved the plan. A small human fleet engaged a lone Velcrin patrol ship near an uninhabited system. They fought carefully, targeting specific systems while making it look like a desperate battle. The Velcrin ship's engines failed and it began spinning out of control. Human ships surrounded it and fired weapons at minimal power, creating massive explosions that looked devastating, but actually did minimal damage. To any observer, the Velcrin ship appeared to explode. But in reality, it was just disabled and hidden inside a cloud of debris. The human ships retreated from the area. Once they were sure no Velcrin vessels were watching, they returned and towed the disabled ship to a secret location. Tae-yang and his engineering team spent 2 weeks studying that captured ship. They tested different frequencies against its shields, recording everything. Finally, they found the patterns. Each class of Velcrin ship used shield frequencies based on a mathematical formula. Once humans understood the formula, they could calculate the counter-frequency for any Velcrin vessel. But building weapons that could generate these precise frequencies would take time. Humanity's shipyards worked around the clock, modifying existing weapons and building new ones. Meanwhile, the Velcrin continued their advance. 4 more colonies fell, millions of humans evacuated, fleeing deeper into human territory. The Terran Assembly was losing patience. Minister Kyung-soo faced increasing pressure to authorize a full military response, even though everyone knew it would likely fail. He called Daehyun for an update. "How much longer until we can fight back?" Kyung-soo asked. He looked exhausted, like he had not slept in days. 2 more weeks to finish the new weapons, Dae-hyun replied. Then we need to position our forces without the Velkrin realizing what we're doing. That's the hard part. 2 weeks. The Velkrin will be within striking distance of Earth in 3 weeks. I know. That's why we need them to think they're winning easily. Every ship we lose, every colony they take, it needs to look like we're on the edge of collapse. Kyung-soo closed his eyes for a moment. You're asking me to let more people die while we prepare. I'm asking you to trust that these deaths won't be meaningless, Dae-hyun said quietly. If we attack too soon, everyone dies. If we wait and do this right, some of us survive. The minister agreed to hold the assembly back for 2 more weeks, but he warned Dae-hyun that after that the politicians would demand action regardless of strategy. Dae-hyun gathered his core team again. Ji-won, Bora, Hana, and Tae-yang sat around a table covered with star maps and tactical displays. We have 2 weeks to set the biggest trap in human history, he said. The Velkrin think we're beaten. Now we need to make them think we're about to collapse completely, so they commit everything to one final push. Hana looked worried. If they realize we're deceiving them, they'll pull back and study us more carefully. Then we lose our only advantage. That's why every detail has to be perfect, Dae-hyun agreed. Every fake retreat, every stage communication, every ship movement. It all has to look completely genuine. Bora pulled up a star chart. The Midway Cluster. It's between the Velkrin Advance and Earth. The area has gravitational anomalies that make navigation difficult. We know how to navigate it. They don't. A perfect place for a last stand, Ji-won added, and a perfect place for an ambush. Dae-hyun smiled grimly. Then that's where we make our stand. That's where we show the Velkrin that humans are not prey. We're predators and they just walked into our hunting ground. The deception began with what looked like humanity's desperate last efforts at defense. Commander Dae-hyun sent battle groups to intercept the Velkrin advance, but he gave those groups very specific orders. They were to fight bravely, make it look real, but ultimately retreat in disorder. Every battle needed to appear genuine while feeding the Velkrin false information. Captain Ji-won led the first staged battle near the Outer Rim colonies. Her fleet of 20 ships faced 40 Velkrin vessels. The battle lasted 3 hours. Human ships fired their weapons with genuine intensity, but they aimed for non-critical areas of Velkrin ships. When the Velkrin returned fire, Ji-won's ships would take real damage. The suffering was real. The deaths were real. But the overall strategy was controlled. Ji-won hated every moment of it. She watched good people die while she followed orders to retreat. She wanted to stay and fight properly, but she knew that would doom everyone, so she gave the order to fall back. Her remaining ships scattered in different directions, appearing panicked and disorganized. The Velkrin pursued for a while, then stopped to claim the territory they had won. After the battle, Ji-won's communications officer sent a burst transmission back toward Earth. The message was coded, but they made sure it was not coded very well. The Velkrin intercepted it easily. When their translators decoded it, they read, "Lost 60% of fleet strength. Falling back to Mars, do not think we can hold them." The message was a lie. Ji-won had only lost 30% of her actual strength, and the ships that fled were actually moving to predetermined hidden positions. But the Velkrin believed what they wanted to believe, that humanity was broken and running. Dr. Hana worked on an even more delicate task. Using the captured Velkrin communication equipment, she created fake messages between human colonies. These messages talked about evacuation plans, shortage of supplies, and arguments between military commanders. She made sure the Velkrin could intercept every single one. One fake message described a major weapons factory on Mars that was producing humanity's last hope for defense. The factory was real, but it was actually producing basic supplies. The real weapons factories were hidden in asteroid fields where the Velkrin would not think to look. Hana wanted the Velkrin to believe they knew where humanity's strength was gathering. Another fake message discussed splitting the remaining Terran fleet into 2 groups. One group would defend Earth directly, while the other would make a desperate attack on Velkrin supply lines. This message gave specific fleet positions and movement times. All of it was false, but it seemed real enough to be believable. The Velkrin took the bait. Their high command analyzed all the intercepted messages and changed their strategy accordingly. They sent a large force to destroy the Mars weapons factory. They positioned ships to intercept the fake attack on their supply lines. and they prepared 70% of their entire invasion fleet for a final push through the Midway cluster toward Earth. Everything was going according to Dae-hyun's plan. But the cost was terrible. To make the deception convincing, real colonies had to be sacrificed. Real people died while humanity's military appeared to fail at defending them. Dae-hyun did not sleep well. He saw the casualty reports every day, thousands of names, thousands of lives lost to make the trap believable. Minister Kyung-soo called him one night. "The assembly is demanding to know why we're not fighting back properly," he said. "I'm running out of ways to explain this to them." "One more week," Dae-hyun replied. "The new weapons are almost ready and the Velkrin are almost where we need them to be. People are calling you a coward. Some are saying you should be arrested for incompetence. Let them say what they want. When this is over, they'll either thank me or I'll be dead anyway." Lieutenant Bora was in charge of the most dangerous part of the operation. She commanded a stealth reconnaissance ship that followed the Velkrin fleet from a distance. Her job was to track their movements in real time and confirm they were heading into the trap. If her ship was discovered, the entire plan would collapse. Bora's vessel was barely larger than a fighter craft. It had advanced stealth systems but almost no weapons or armor. For 2 weeks, she and her small crew followed the Velkrin invasion fleet through deep space, staying hidden in the shadows of planets and behind cosmic dust clouds. At night, Bora would send encrypted updates to Dae-hyun. The messages were short and careful. "Enemy fleet maintaining formation. No signs of suspicion." Or, "Target fleet advancing toward Midway cluster as predicted." Meanwhile, engineer Tae-yang worked in the secret asteroid shipyards. Hundreds of human ships were being retrofitted with the new harmonic disruptor weapons. These weapons were not pretty or elegant. They were built quickly and designed for one purpose: to penetrate Velkrin shields long enough for conventional weapons to do damage. Tae-yang tested each weapon personally. He was obsessed with making sure they worked perfectly. One small error in the harmonic frequency, and the shields would hold. He barely ate or slept, running test after test on captured Velkrin shield generators. One of his assistants told him to rest. "You'll collapse if you keep this up," she said. Tae-yang shook his head. "If these weapons fail, millions of people die. I'll rest when I know they work." The pieces of the trap slowly came together. Hidden in the gravitational anomalies of the Midway cluster, human ships waited in predetermined positions. They powered down their systems to minimum levels, making them almost impossible to detect. Some ships hid in the shadow of collapsed stars, where the intense gravity made sensors unreliable. Others positioned themselves behind rogue planets that drifted through the cluster. Captain Ji-won was among them. After her staged retreat, she had brought her battle group to the cluster and waited. For days, her crew sat in silence, conserving energy, preparing for the moment when they would strike. The waiting was hard. Soldiers sat in the dark, checking their weapons over and over. Engineers made tiny adjustments to the new harmonic disruptors, paranoid that something might fail. Ji-won walked through her ship, talking quietly to her people, keeping their spirits up. "When will they come?" one young officer asked her. "Soon," Ji-won replied. "And when they do, we show them what happens when you underestimate humanity." Far away in Velkrin-controlled space, something unexpected was happening. A human agent named Minji had been living undercover in occupied territory for months. She pretended to be from a species that the Velkrin had already conquered, working as a servant in a Velkrin military base. Her job was to observe and report. Minji had sent countless messages back to human intelligence detailing Velkrin movements, supply levels, and command structure. But her most important mission was still ahead. When the Velkrin fleet departed for their final assault on Earth, she needed to confirm their exact numbers and composition. She watched from the servant quarters as the massive fleet assembled. Hundreds of ships gathered in formation. The Velkrin warriors were excited, certain that victory was near. They spoke openly about how they would divide human territory among themselves after the conquest was complete. Minji recorded everything and sent one final transmission. Primary fleet departing for Midway cluster. 73 capital ships, 200 escorts, 400 support vessels. Supreme Commander aboard flagship Dominant Will. They believe human fleet strength is at 20% of original capacity. The message reached Dae-hyun within hours. He studied the numbers carefully. The Velkrin were committing even more forces than he had hoped. Their confidence had made them reckless. Perfect. He sent orders to all human forces. Prepare for engagement. Operation Mirror proceeds as planned. The Velcrin fleet entered the Midway cluster 3 days later. They moved in their standard formation, confident and unconcerned. Their sensors showed some gravitational interference from the cluster's anomalies, but nothing they considered dangerous. They detected a small human fleet ahead, apparently trying to form a defensive line. It looked pathetic, desperate. The Velcrin Supreme Commander aboard the flagship Dominant Will gave orders to advance and destroy the human ships quickly. He wanted to reach Earth within 2 days and begin the final phase of conquest. What he did not know was that nearly 200 human ships were hiding all around him, powered down and invisible. What he did not know was that every single human weapon had been modified to exploit his shield technology. What he did not know was that he had just led his fleet into the most carefully planned trap in human history. Aboard the TDS Indomitable, Captain Ji-won received the signal. 3 words from Commander Dae-hyun: "Spring the trap." She smiled for the first time in weeks. Then she gave the order to power up all systems and prepare for battle. Around the cluster, hundreds of other human ships did the same. The hunt was about to begin. The Velcrin fleet advanced through the Midway cluster in perfect formation, as they always did. Their sensors showed a small group of human ships ahead, maybe 20 vessels arranged in a desperate defensive line. The Velcrin Supreme Commander gave orders to attack with overwhelming force. He wanted this battle finished quickly so his fleet could reach Earth before the humans could mount any more resistance. Then everything changed. Human ships appeared from every direction at once. They emerged from behind rogue planets, from the gravitational shadows of collapsed stars, from clouds of cosmic dust. 200 vessels powered up simultaneously, their weapons already locked onto Velcrin targets. The enemy fleet suddenly found itself surrounded. Captain Ji-won's voice echoed across the human fleet's command channel. All ships fire at will. Target their shields with harmonic disruptors first, then follow with conventional weapons. The TDS Indomitable fired first. Blue beams of energy shot from its modified weapons, striking a Velcrin capital ship. For 3 seconds, the Velcrin shields flickered and failed, exactly as engineer Tae-yang had calculated. In those 3 seconds, Ji-won's conventional missiles and railguns hit the unprotected hull. The Velcrin ship shuddered as explosions tore through its armor. All across the battlefield, the same thing happened. Velcrin shields, which had seemed invincible for weeks, suddenly failed under the harmonic disruptor attacks. Human weapons found their marks. Velcrin ships took damage for the first time in this war. The Velcrin Supreme Commander stared at his tactical display in disbelief. How was this possible? His intelligence said the human fleet was broken and scattered. Instead, he faced a coordinated ambush with new weapons he had never seen before. For the first time in his long military career, he felt something unfamiliar. Fear. Lieutenant Bora commanded a wolf pack of destroyers that targeted Velcrin supply ships. These vessels carried fuel, ammunition, and repair equipment. Without them, the Velcrin fleet could not sustain a long battle. Bora's ships moved fast, using the Midway cluster's gravitational currents to slingshot around planets and build speed. "Remember," she told her pilots, "we hit the supply ships and get out before their escorts can respond." Quick strikes then fade back into the cluster. Her destroyers attacked like sharks. They appeared, fired their disruptors and torpedoes, then vanished into the gravitational shadows before the Velcrin could organize a counterattack. Within the first hour, Bora's wolf pack destroyed 12 supply vessels. The Velcrin fleet's ability to resupply itself was crippling. Engineer Tae-yang was aboard a specialized command vessel, equipped with powerful computers and sensor arrays. His job was to monitor the harmonic disruptors in real time and adjust frequencies if the Velcrin tried to adapt their shields. He watched dozens of screens at once, tracking weapon performance across the entire battlefield. When he saw 3 Velcrin ships attempting to modify their shield frequencies, he immediately calculated counter-adjustments and transmitted them to nearby human vessels. The ships updated their disruptors within seconds, and the Velcrin shields failed again. Tae-yang allowed himself a small smile. His weapons were working better than he had hoped, but the battle was far from won. The Velcrin still had numerical superiority, and their ships were individually more powerful than human vessels. They began adapting to the ambush, forming tighter defensive formations and concentrating their fire. A human cruiser exploded when 5 Velcrin ships targeted it simultaneously. Then another. The casualties began mounting. Commander Dae-hyun monitored the battle from his command center on Mars, though every instinct told him he should be out there fighting. But his place was here, coordinating the overall strategy, making the decisions that individual ship captains could not. He watched as the Velcrin tried to break through the human encirclement in one direction. They were choosing to attack toward an area where human forces looked weakest. It was a logical choice. It was also exactly what Dae-hyun had predicted they would do. Reserve Force Beta moved to intercept, he ordered calmly. Spring secondary ambush. 50 more human ships held in reserve and hidden even more carefully than the others suddenly appeared directly in the path of the Velcrin breakout attempt. The enemy fleet ran straight into them. More Velcrin ships took damage and fell out of formation. Aboard the Velcrin flagship Dominant Will, chaos was spreading. Officers shouted conflicting reports. Some wanted to retreat. Others demanded they push through and destroy the human forces. The Supreme Commander tried to maintain order, but the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Then something unprecedented happened. The Supreme Commander's own subordinate officers began questioning his orders. This was unthinkable in Velcrin culture. For centuries, orders from superior officers were absolute. Questioning them was punishable by death. But faced with a battle they were clearly losing, with their ships burning around them, even rigid Velcrin discipline began to crack. Dr. Hana was monitoring Velcrin communications from Earth. When she heard the arguments breaking out on enemy command channels, she immediately opened a communication link to Dae-hyun. The Velcrin command structure is fracturing, she reported excitedly. We need to push them harder now while they're confused. She also activated another part of the plan. Using the captured Velcrin communication equipment, she began broadcasting messages across all Velcrin frequencies. The messages contained recordings of Velcrin command discussions that humans had intercepted weeks ago. The broadcasts proved that humans had been listening to Velcrin communications the entire time, that every move the Velcrin made had been anticipated. You walked into our trap, Hana's broadcast declared in the Velcrin language. Everything you thought you knew about us was a lie. We are not primitives. We are not defeated. We are humanity and we do not surrender. The psychological impact was devastating. Velcrin warriors, trained to believe in their absolute superiority, suddenly realized they had been outmaneuvered by a species they had dismissed as inferior. Some continued fighting with fanatical determination, but others hesitated, their confidence shattered. The Velcrin Supreme Commander aboard his flagship made a final desperate decision. He ordered all remaining ships to concentrate around his position and make one massive push through the human lines toward open space. If they could break free of the cluster, they could retreat and regroup. It was his only option besides surrender, which was unthinkable. The order was clear, but only half his fleet obeyed. The other half, seeing that the order would likely lead to their destruction, refused. Ship captains argued with each other over the communication channels. Some tried to follow the Supreme Commander's order. Others tried to surrender. A few simply fled in random directions. The Velcrin fleet, which had been so organized and disciplined, fell apart into confusion and chaos. Captain Jiwon saw the opportunity. All ships concentrate fire on the flagship. If we take down their Supreme Commander, this battle is over. The TDS Indomitable led a squadron of human cruisers directly toward the Dominant Will. The Velcrin flagship was massive, 3 times larger than any human ship, bristling with weapons, but it was also damaged and surrounded by burning escort vessels. Jiwon's squadron fired everything they had. Harmonic disruptors hit the flagship's shields from multiple angles. When the shields failed, railgun rounds and missiles struck the hull. Explosions rippled across the Velcrin ship's surface. But the Dominant Will did not fall easily. It returned fire with devastating effect. One human cruiser exploded instantly. Another lost its engines and drifted helplessly. Jiwon's own ship shook as Velcrin energy weapons scorched its armor. Keep firing, Jiwon shouted. Target their command center. The battle for the flagship lasted 20 minutes. Both sides poured fire into each other at close range. Finally, a human torpedo penetrated deep into the Dominant Will's interior and detonated near its reactor. The massive ship shuddered, then went dark. Its systems failed one by one. The Velcrin Supreme Commander sent one last message before his ship lost all power. How did inferior species defeat us? No one answered him. His flagship was captured intact by human boarding parties an hour later. The Supreme Commander himself was taken prisoner. The first time in Velcrin history that their highest military leader had been captured alive. With their flagship down and their commander captured, the remaining Velcrin fleet lost all cohesion. Some ships tried to fight to the death. Others attempted to flee. A few, seeing no other option, actually surrendered. The Battle of Midway Cluster lasted 8 more hours as human forces systematically destroyed or captured the remaining enemy vessels. When it was finally over, the cost was clear. Humanity had lost 37 ships and thousands of lives, but the Velcrin had lost 73 capital ships, nearly 200 escorts, and their supreme commander. Their invasion fleet was destroyed. Commander Dae-hyun watched the final casualty reports come in. The victory was complete, but he felt no joy. Too many people had died to reach this moment. He thought about all the lives lost in the staged retreats, the sacrificed colonies, the soldiers who died in the ambush. Captain Ji-won sent him a message from the battlefield. It worked. Your plan worked. Was it worth the cost? Dae-hyun took a long time before responding. Finally, he wrote, The victory at Midway Cluster sent shockwaves across the galaxy. News traveled fast through the communication networks that connected different star systems. Within days, every major civilization knew that the seemingly unstoppable Velcrin Dominion had suffered its first major defeat in 3 centuries. The species that delivered that defeat was humanity, a race many aliens had dismissed as young and insignificant. Commander Dae-hyun, now promoted to Grand Admiral by the Terran Assembly, stood in his new office looking at Earth through the window. The promotion felt hollow. He kept thinking about the thousands who had died during the staged retreats and the final battle. Victory had come at a terrible price. Minister Kyung-soo visited him the day after the promotion ceremony. The old minister looked even more tired than before, but there was relief in his eyes. The Assembly wants you to lead the entire Terran Defense Fleet, he said. They're calling you the greatest military mind of our generation. Dae-hyun turned from the window. I just did what was necessary. That doesn't make me great. It makes me someone who was willing to sacrifice lives for a larger goal. That's exactly what a military leader does, Kyung-soo replied gently. The question now is what we do with this victory. The Velcrin Empire is fracturing. Some of their factions want revenge. Others are questioning everything their society believed. This was the complicated part. The Velcrin were not a single unified force anymore. The defeat had split them politically and philosophically. Some Velcrin wanted to rebuild their military and attack humanity again. But others, especially younger Velcrin who had never questioned their society before, started asking difficult questions. Why did they conquer other species? What gave them that right? Were they really superior to everyone else? Dr. Hana became humanity's chief negotiator with the various Velcrin factions. She understood their language and culture better than anyone else. She traveled to neutral territory to meet with Velcrin representatives who wanted to discuss peace terms. The first meeting was tense. Velcrin diplomats sat across from Hana, their forearms crossed in defensive postures. They were not used to negotiating. Their culture had always been about giving orders and expecting obedience. Your people destroyed our invasion fleet, one Velcrin said. What do you want from us? Total surrender? Hana shook her head. We want peace. Real peace, not just a pause before the next war. That means your empire needs to change fundamentally. You ask us to abandon our entire way of life, another Velcrin responded angrily. I ask you to stop conquering and enslaving other species, Hana replied calmly. You've held 17 civilizations in subjugation for decades or centuries. Release them. Let them govern themselves. In return, humanity will provide aid to help rebuild your society into something better. The Velcrin representatives were shocked. They expected demands for resources, territory, maybe even enslavement of their own people as revenge. Instead, humanity was offering help in exchange for freedom for the species the Velcrin had conquered. It took weeks of negotiation, but eventually a deal was reached with the progressive Velcrin factions. They would dismantle their empire, release all conquered species, and work with humanity to build new relationships based on cooperation rather than domination. In exchange, humanity would provide food, medical supplies, and technology to help Velcrin worlds transition to this new way of life. Not all Velcrin accepted this deal. Hardline military factions retreated to their core systems and vowed to return someday, but they were a minority now, isolated and weakened. The rest of the Velcrin civilization chose a different path. Captain Jiwan was given command of the First Fleet, the most powerful naval force in human space. Her job was to defend the liberated colonies and ensure the Velcrin kept their promises. She took the responsibility seriously, but found herself thinking more about peace than war now. She visited one of the formerly conquered species' homeworlds. The aliens there, called the Prith, had been under Velcrin rule for 80 years. They were small, barely reaching human waist height, with 6 legs and expressive eyes. When Captain Jiwan's ship arrived, thousands of Prith gathered to see the humans who had freed them. An elder Prith approached Jiwan and spoke through a translation device. "We heard stories about your species. We heard you were clever and brave, but we also heard you were ruthless." "Which is true?" Jiwan thought carefully before answering. "All of it is true. We can be clever and brave. We can also be ruthless when we need to be. But most of all, we believe in freedom, not just for ourselves, but for everyone." The elder nodded slowly. The Velcrin believed they were the greatest species in the galaxy. They learned they were wrong. Perhaps we are all learning now that greatness is not about power. It is about how you use that power. Back on Earth, engineer Taeyang led a new project. With the threat of the Velcrin reduced, humanity could focus on peaceful technological development again. But Taeyang also knew that new threats would eventually appear. The galaxy was a dangerous place. He designed a new generation of ships that combined human ingenuity with technology learned from the Velcrin and other species. These ships were not just weapons. They were equipped for exploration, diplomacy, scientific research, and yes, defense if necessary. Taeyang called them the Unity-class vessels, symbolizing humanity's hope for a more cooperative future. Lieutenant Bora, despite her youth, became one of the youngest strategists on the Terran High Command. She worked with Dae-hyun to develop new defensive doctrines. The success at Midway Cluster had proven that careful planning and creative thinking could overcome superior force. But Bora also understood that the same strategy would not work twice. Future enemies would learn from the Velcrin's mistakes. "We need to stay unpredictable," she told Dae-hyun during a strategy session. "If we develop one way of fighting and stick to it, we become like the Velcrin." "We become rigid," Dae-hyun agreed. "Adaptability is our greatest strength. We must never lose that." The 3 alien civilizations that humanity had befriended before the Velcrin invasion now sought closer ties. They had remained neutral during the war, watching to see who would win. Now they wanted to be part of what humanity was building. Representatives from these civilizations met with the Terran Assembly to discuss forming a coalition. Minister Kyung-soo proposed calling it the Coalition of Free Worlds, an alliance based on mutual respect and cooperation rather than dominance. "No species is superior to another," Kyung-soo told the gathered representatives. "We all have strengths and weaknesses. We all have things to teach and things to learn. Together, we are stronger than apart." The coalition was formally established 6 months after the Battle of Midway Cluster. Its first act was to send aid missions to help rebuild the civilizations the Velcrin had damaged. Human engineers worked alongside alien scientists to repair infrastructure. Doctors from different species shared medical knowledge. Teachers helped establish schools where young beings from multiple worlds could learn together. Minji, the agent who had spent months undercover in Velcrin territory, was finally able to come home. She had not only survived but had helped dozens of prisoners escape during the chaos following the Velcrin defeat. The Terran Assembly awarded her the highest civilian honor for bravery. At the ceremony, Minji said something that resonated with many people. "I spent months pretending to be someone I was not, living among people who saw me as inferior. The hardest part was not the danger. It was remembering that I was human, that I had worth when everyone around me said I did not. That's what the Velcrin did to all their conquered peoples. They tried to make them forget their worth." 1 year after the Battle of Midway Cluster, a ceremony was held at the rebuilt Harmony Station. The new station was larger than the original, and it incorporated architectural elements from a dozen different species. It was a symbol of the new era that was beginning. Grand Admiral Dae-hyun attended the ceremony along with Captain Jiwan, Dr. Hana, Lieutenant Bora, and Engineer Taeyang. They stood together on the observation deck, watching as ships from many different civilizations arrived for the celebration. Dr. Hana broke the comfortable silence. Do you think it will last? This peace we've built? Nothing lasts forever, Daehyun replied. There will be other threats, other conflicts. But we've proven something important. We've shown that cooperation works better than conquest. That's a lesson the entire galaxy is learning now. Captain Jiwon pointed at a Velcrin ship that was approaching the station. It was one of the progressive faction vessels, carrying diplomats who wanted to participate in the coalition. A year ago, I would have shot at that ship on sight. Now it's here to celebrate peace with us. Change is possible, Taeyang smiled. The Velcrin thought they knew everything about warfare. They had conquered 17 civilizations with the same strategies. But they never fought anyone like us. What makes us different? Bora asked. Daehyun considered the question carefully. We adapt, we learn. We question everything, including ourselves. The Velcrin believed they were perfect, so they never changed. We know we're not perfect, so we keep trying to improve. That's humanity's real strength. As they watched the gathering of ships from across the galaxy, Daehyun thought about everything that had happened. The destruction, the sacrifice, the victory.